"Those numbers don't add up," the new waitress whispered to the billionaire, just seconds before a $500 million mistake. What if everything you'd fought to rebuild could be destroyed by your silence, or saved by a single act of impossible courage? The decision that destroyed Amy's career the first time had looked exactly like this. Truth demanding to be spoken in a moment when silence would have been so much safer.
Before we begin, click subscribe to support our growth and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and you won't want to miss them.
Let's get back to the story. Amy Walker had been serving tables at Vellum and Vine for exactly 3 days, navigating between gilded columns and crystal stemware. But she'd never seen anyone examine documents with such dangerous intensity as the man seated beneath the amber chandelier. Malcolm Vance, though she didn't yet know his name, hunched forward over a spread of pristine contracts, his confident fingers suddenly hesitant as they traced the margins of each page. The soft jazz couldn't mask the tension radiating from his table, and Amy noticed something that made her breath catch. The signature block on those papers looked wrong. Too polished, too uniform, like a careful imitation rather than authentic corporate documentation. She'd reviewed enough fraudulent contracts during her years in compliance to recognize the telltale precision of forgery. Her pulse hammered as she realized this composed executive might be seconds away from financial annihilation. Where are you standing right now? Amy had always possessed an instinct for deception, a talent that had served her ruthlessly well during her previous life as a corporate fraud analyst, before a whistleblowing scandal obliterated her reputation and left her unemployable in the field she'd mastered. The blacklist had been swift and merciless, and now supporting her teenage daughter Maya while searching for redemption meant accepting whatever legitimate work she could find. But those forensic instincts never dimmed. She'd learned to read the micro-expressions of guilt, to spot the inconsistencies hiding in plain sight within dense financial documents. Malcolm Vance embodied everything Amy once represented in her former world: authority, expertise, the power to make billion-dollar decisions with a signature. At what appeared to be his late 40s, he carried himself with the understated confidence of someone who'd built a tech empire on innovation and integrity. His perfectly tailored Navy suit spoke of boardrooms and private acquisitions, yet something uncharacteristically vulnerable flickered across his features as he reviewed those documents for what must have been the 4th time. He'd reserved this private corner of Vellum and Vine for the evening, requesting absolute discretion, and the staff had been briefed to provide impeccable service without interruption. Tonight felt different from the usual high-stakes dinners Amy had observed during her short tenure. Malcolm kept glancing toward the restaurant's entrance with barely concealed anticipation, his water glass untouched despite the visible tension in his shoulders. Across from him sat Graham Sinclair, impeccably dressed in charcoal gray, his rehearsed smile never quite reaching his calculating eyes. The document between them bore the elegant header Meridian Renewable Solutions, LLC, a name that triggered something uncomfortable in Amy's memory. She'd encountered that corporate structure before, buried in a case file from her compliance days, connected to something that had raised red flags before the investigation mysteriously dissolved. As she approached to refresh Malcolm's untouched sparkling water, Amy caught a clear view of the signature page. The notary seal appeared oddly two-dimensional, missing the tactile depth of legitimate embossing that state requirements demanded. Her stomach tightened. The font choices seemed deliberately antiquated too, modern software mimicking traditional legal stationery with just enough inaccuracy to betray its origin. These weren't minor discrepancies. They were glaring indicators of sophisticated fraud, the kind that cost victims not just money, but decades of work. Malcolm's eyes lifted, catching her hovering presence. "Everything all right, miss?" His voice carried genuine warmth rather than the dismissiveness she'd expected from someone of his stature. Most powerful executives barely registered service staff as human, yet his gaze held both courtesy and concern. "Yes, sir. Just making sure you have everything you need." Amy's training from another life whispered its warnings. Never accuse without evidence, never assume intent, but absolutely investigate suspicious patterns. She needed to find some way to alert him without sounding delusional or crossing the invisible boundaries between server and patron. The antique clock above the bar chimed 9:45. Malcolm straightened, his decision apparently made, and reached for the Mont Blanc pen resting beside the contracts. Graham leaned forward with practiced ease, his voice smooth as silk. "If you'll just initial here and sign the final page, Mr. Vance, we can finalize the acquisition tonight and begin the transfer process tomorrow morning." Amy's hands trembled as the memory crystallized with devastating clarity. Meridian Renewable Solutions. She'd investigated their Shell Corporation network 18 months ago while still at her compliance firm, tracking suspicious energy investment funds that vanished into layered offshore accounts. The case had been building toward criminal referral when suddenly, inexplicably, her superiors ordered it closed. Key witnesses recanted. Documentation disappeared. Amy had pushed back, insisting the fraud was obvious, and that resistance had marked her as a problem, the beginning of her professional destruction. But she remembered the pattern: elaborate presentations, prestigious credentials that crumbled under scrutiny, and victims who lost everything before realizing they'd been targeted by exceptionally sophisticated predators. Malcolm's pen hovered inches above the signature line, and Amy felt the weight of choice crushing down on her. Speak now and risk everything she'd barely begun to rebuild, or stay silent and watch history repeat itself with $500 million at stake. Amy didn't expect the world to care about one fired waitress and a fraud that never happened. She certainly didn't expect her phone to explode with notifications before she'd even made it home that night. The first message came from a number she didn't recognize. "You're trending on Twitter." Someone filmed the whole thing. By the time Amy reached her modest apartment in Queens, dripping rainwater onto the tired hallway carpet, her phone had become unusable. Hundreds of calls, thousands of notifications, her ancient device overheating from the digital onslaught. Maya met her at the door, 15 years old and wide-eyed with confusion, and something that looked almost like pride. "Mom, you're famous." Her daughter held up her own phone, showing a shaky video that had already accumulated millions of views. The caption read, "Waitress stops $500 million fraud. Gets fired for saving billionaire CEO." The video had caught everything: Amy's trembling intervention, Graham Sinclair's unmasking, the security escort, and most damningly, Christine Beaumont's cold dismissal of the woman who'd just prevented a catastrophic fraud. The comments section had become a battlefield of outrage and support. This is what integrity looks like in 2025. She lost her job for doing the right thing. Someone started a GoFundMe. That restaurant should be ashamed. She's a hero. By morning, Amy's story had metastasized beyond social media into something larger and more terrifying. News vans lined her street like a motorcade. Reporters called her name from the sidewalk. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chun, kept bringing her tea and asking if she needed anything, while clearly dying to know more details. "The waitress who saved a billionaire" became the headline that saturated every news cycle. Corporate ethics blogs dissected her decision. Business schools debated the case. Someone had indeed started a GoFundMe, and strangers were donating thousands of dollars to support her and Maya. The fundraiser's description read, "For the woman who proved integrity matters more than employment." Amy avoided it all. She declined every interview request, ignored every producer's email, stayed inside her small apartment while the world outside debated whether she was courageous or reckless, principled or foolish. In her own eyes, she was simply tired. A woman who'd made the same choice twice and suffered the same consequence twice, despite the internet's insistence on calling her heroic. "You should talk to someone, Mom." Maya sat cross-legged on their worn couch, watching her mother stare at the wall. "People want to hear your story." "I'm not a hero, sweetheart. I'm just someone who saw something wrong and couldn't stay quiet." Amy's voice carried the exhaustion of years, not days. "The same thing that got me blacklisted before." 3 days after the incident, on a gray afternoon when the media presence had finally begun to thin, a sleek black Mercedes S-Class pulled up outside Amy's building. The remaining photographers immediately stirred, cameras clicking furiously as Malcolm Vance himself stepped out, dressed in a charcoal suit and carrying a leather portfolio that looked far more legitimate than Graham Sinclair's fraudulent documents. Amy watched from her third-floor window, her stomach tightening with anxiety. She'd saved his company, yes, but she'd also cost him the embarrassment of nearly falling for an elaborate con. Successful men didn't always appreciate being reminded of their near mistakes. The knock on her door came precisely 2 minutes later. Maya answered, her teenage composure faltering, as she recognized the billionaire whose face had been plastered across every news site alongside her mother's. Ms. Walker. Malcolm's smile was genuine warm, entirely different from the tense executive she'd encountered at Vellum and Vine. I owe you considerably more than gratitude. Amy stood in her tiny living room, suddenly conscious of the space's modest furnishings, the water stain on the ceiling they couldn't afford to fix, the sharp contrast between Malcolm's world and hers. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Vance. I just did what anyone should have. But didn't. He stepped inside at her gesture, seeming entirely comfortable despite the surroundings. No one else in that restaurant saw what you saw. Or if they did, they stayed silent. You risked everything to warn a stranger about danger you had no obligation to prevent. He set the portfolio on her coffee table. I've spent the last 3 days having my security team investigate Meridian Renewable Solutions. You were right about everything. Graham Sinclair, his real name is Marcus Hoffman, has been running international fraud schemes for 8 years. Shell corporations across 4 continents. Over $2 billion stolen from various executives and institutions. The FBI had been tracking him for months. I'm glad they caught him. Amy's voice was quiet. That's what matters. What matters, Malcolm countered, is that you recognized a pattern that trained professionals missed. That you possessed the expertise, courage, and integrity to act on it despite enormous personal cost. He opened the portfolio, revealing formal documentation. Which is why I'm here to offer you a position at Vance Dynamics, Head of Corporate Ethics and Risk Division. You'd be building the department from the ground up, establishing protocols to protect the company from the kind of fraud you prevented. The kind of fraud that, according to my research, you exposed at your previous firm before they destroyed your career for it. The silence that followed felt weighted with history. Amy stared at the documents, at the salary figure that would change everything for her and Maya, at the title that represented everything she'd lost and more. Her hands trembled as memories flooded back, the whistleblowing case that had ruined her. 6 years ago, younger and more naive, Amy had discovered systematic embezzlement in her compliance firm's largest client account. Millions being siphoned through false vendor payments. She'd reported it internally, trusting the system. Instead, the partners had buried her findings, pressured her to recant, and when she refused, systematically destroyed her professional reputation. Leaked false performance reviews. Whispered that she was unstable, unreliable, a troublemaker who fabricated concerns for attention. She'd been blacklisted so thoroughly that even firms in other states wouldn't return her calls. The betrayal had nearly broken her. She'd lost her career, her savings in the divorce that followed, her faith in the idea that truth mattered in corporate America. Malcolm watched her with patient understanding, as if he could see the history playing across her features. I know what happened to you, Amy. I know why you ended up serving tables instead of leading fraud investigations. And I know that offering you this position means asking you to trust a system that failed you catastrophically. He leaned forward, his expression sincere. But I also believe that what happened at my table proved something important. You haven't lost your instincts or your courage. You've just been waiting for an opportunity that deserved them. I don't know if I can go back to that world. Amy's voice cracked slightly. If I'm ready to, then take time to decide. Malcolm stood, leaving the documents on the table. But Amy, consider this. Right now, there's no system in place to protect people like you, people who tell inconvenient truths. What if you could build that system? What if you could create an environment where whistleblowers are protected instead of punished? Amy looked up sharply, something igniting in her chest. That's not typically how corporate ethics divisions function. Then maybe it's time to reimagine what they could be. Malcolm smiled. I'll give you 1 week to think about it. Build the department however you see fit. Hire whoever you want. Report directly to me. Not through HR or legal where concerns can be buried. Real authority to investigate anything that concerns you, with full protection from retaliation. He paused at the door. I nearly lost $500 million because I didn't have someone like you in my organization. I won't make that mistake twice. After he left, Amy sat with Maya on their couch, staring at the portfolio that represented redemption or risk. She wasn't sure which. You're going to take it, right? Maya's voice held certainty that Amy didn't feel. I don't know, honey. Last time I tried to be a corporate truth teller. Last time you worked for people who didn't deserve you. Maya's 15-year-old wisdom cut straight to the heart. This guy seems different. Plus, Mom, you literally saved him from a massive fraud. He knows what you're capable of. The decision crystallized slowly over the following days, but the turning point came when Amy saw the new headline. Waitress fired for doing the right thing. The corporate ethics failure we can't ignore. She called Malcolm on the 5th day. I'll take the position, but I have one condition. Name it. I build a system that actually protects truth tellers. Not just policies that look good on paper, but get ignored when convenient. Real protections, anonymous reporting channels, independent investigation protocols, legal defense funds for whistleblowers, consequences for retaliation. Amy's voice steadied as she spoke, the old confidence returning. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. I wouldn't want it any other way. The irony of the aftermath was so perfect it felt almost scripted. Within 2 weeks, the headline transformed. Fired waitress now leads corporate ethics at billion-dollar tech firm. The story captured imaginations precisely because it shouldn't have been possible. The woman punished for integrity, now empowered to enforce it. Vellum and Vine facing public relations catastrophe. Attempted damage control by adding Amy's photograph to their newly created wall of honor. A gesture so transparently cynical that it sparked another wave of social media mockery. Christine Beaumont quietly left her position. The restaurant's owner issued a formal apology that Amy never acknowledged. Tanya and Leo, watching from their posts at the restaurant, shared a knowing smile. Never bet against someone who's actually willing to lose everything for the truth, Leo murmured. Those are the ones who change everything. On Amy's first day, Advanced Dynamics, she found herself in a corner office overlooking Manhattan. The city spread before her like a promise. But before diving into building her department, she did something that felt necessary. She returned to Vellum and Vine during a quiet afternoon, when the lunch rush had ended and the dinner crowd hadn't yet arrived. The restaurant looked different in daylight, less intimidating, more ordinary. She found the table where it had all happened, now empty except for fresh linens and perfect place settings. Soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. Funny, Amy thought, trailing her fingers across the chair where Malcolm had nearly signed away $500 million. One whisper can ruin a life, or rebuild it. The difference isn't in the whisper itself, but in whether anyone's brave enough to listen. Her phone vibrated with a text from Malcolm. Ready for your first board meeting? We're presenting the new ethics division structure this afternoon. Amy smiled, a genuine expression of something that felt remarkably like peace. She typed her response, always. As she left the restaurant, walking past a photograph of herself that hung near the entrance, a bizarre trophy from her own professional execution, Amy realized the real ridiculousness of her story wasn't that she'd been fired for doing the right thing. It was that doing the right thing, which should have been unremarkable, had required courage at all. But it had. And she'd found it. And somehow, impossibly, the world had bent toward justice instead of away from it. Once a waitress, now a watchdog, Amy Walker proved that sometimes the smallest voice in the room saves the loudest empire. And sometimes, just sometimes, that voice is rewarded instead of silenced. The story wasn't over. It was only beginning. But for the first time in years, Amy Walker was writing it herself. What would you have done if you were in her shoes? Tell us below. Every story hides a lesson, and every lesson deserves to be told. Subscribe and join us for the next one. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, kindly subscribe and share. It helps us tell more stories that matter. Thank you. The decision that destroyed Amy's career the first time had looked exactly like this. Truth demanding to be spoken in a moment when silence would have been so much safer. Her voice emerged before courage could abandon her. "I'm sorry, sir." Amy's words cut through the refined atmosphere like a blade through silk. "There's an urgent call from your CFO about those closing documents." The restaurant seemed to inhale and hold its breath. Conversations at nearby tables faltered. A server froze mid-pour, expensive Bordeaux, suspended over crystal. Graham Sinclair's practiced smile remained perfectly in place, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes, the irritation of a predator interrupted mid-strike. Malcolm's pen stopped moving, his expression shifting from concentration to confusion as he looked up at this new waitress who'd just shattered the moment he'd been building toward for weeks. "My CFO." Malcolm's brow furrowed. "I didn't tell anyone I was." "It came through the restaurant's main line, sir." Amy's heart hammered so violently she was certain everyone could hear it. Her hands trembled as she gestured toward the corridor leading past the private dining rooms. "They said it was urgent. About verification issues with the transfer documentation." Graham's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Vance, I'm sure it can wait until after we—" "No." Malcolm set down his pen with deliberate care, his business instincts clearly engaged now. "If Richard is calling here, something's wrong." He stood, his movements controlled despite obvious tension. "Excuse me, Graham. This won't take long." Amy turned toward the hallway, praying her legs would carry her without collapsing, acutely aware of Graham's calculating gaze burning into her back and the curious stares from staff members who knew exactly how inappropriate her intervention had been. Behind her, she heard Graham's voice, smooth as poison honey. "Of course, take your time. Though I should mention the signing deadline is midnight, bank requirements for the wire transfer." The corridor felt impossibly long, amber sconces casting shadows that seemed to mirror Amy's terror. The muted sounds of the restaurant faded behind them, replaced by the thunderous rhythm of her pulse. Malcolm followed at a measured distance, his silence more intimidating than any rebuke. When they reached the alcove near the private wine cellar, far enough from prying eyes and ears, Amy turned to face him, and all her careful planning evaporated. "Sir, I know how this looks." The words tumbled out in a desperate rush, professional composure crumbling under the weight of what she was about to risk. "I know I'm completely out of line, but please, those documents aren't real. The numbers in the margin don't align with the acquisition totals. The notary seal is flat, it's missing the embossing required by law. The font spacing is wrong." Her hands shook as she spoke, fingers unconsciously mimicking the gesture of pointing to evidence that wasn't present. "I used to work in corporate fraud analysis. I spent 6 years investigating financial crimes. And I've seen this exact pattern before. Meridian Renewable Solutions. They're not who they claim to be." Malcolm's expression remained unreadable, his eyes studying her with the intensity of someone who'd built an empire by reading people and situations with surgical precision. The silence stretched between them like a physical thing, and Amy felt her career, her fragile new beginning, disintegrating in real time. "You're new here," Malcolm finally said, his voice neutral, revealing nothing. 3 days, you said when you introduced yourself earlier." "Yes, sir." "And you're telling me you just happened to recognize a fraudulent pattern in documents you glimpsed while serving water?" It wasn't quite a question, more an assessment of plausibility. That's either remarkable intuition or I'm insane and about to be fired. Amy's laugh came out brittle, edged with hysteria. "I know, but I also know what I saw, and I know what happens to people who sign documents like those. I investigated a Meridian subsidiary 18 months ago. The case was shut down before we could prove anything, but the pattern was unmistakable. Shell corporations layered offshore accounts, credentials that dissolved under examination." Something shifted in Malcolm's expression. Not belief, not yet, but interest. He glanced back toward the dining room, then at Amy's trembling hands, reading the sincerity in her terror. A successful CEO didn't survive in the tech world without learning to recognize both opportunity and danger in unexpected places. "Stay here," he said quietly. Don't move. Don't speak to anyone. Amy nodded, unable to produce words as Malcolm turned and walked back toward his table with the same measured confidence he displayed throughout the evening. Through the archway, she could see him sliding back into his seat, gesturing apologetically to Graham. Her lungs felt constricted, each breath requiring conscious effort. She'd just committed professional suicide. Again. But this time she'd done it with open eyes, choosing integrity over self-preservation, and there was something almost peaceful in the certainty of it. Malcolm's voice carried clearly in the hushed restaurant. My apologies, Graham. False alarm, just my operations team being overly cautious. He reached for the contract again, and Amy's stomach dropped. Then she heard him continue, his tone casually conversational. Before we finalize, remind me again, what's the cross-border compliance clause under Article 9? I want to make sure my legal team hasn't missed anything. Graham's pause lasted only a heartbeat, but to someone listening for it, that hesitation screamed volumes. Article 9 covers the standard regulatory frameworks, Malcolm. Nothing unusual, just the typical EU and US coordination requirements. Right, of course. Malcolm nodded, his expression pleasant. And the verification code for the offshore escrow account. That came through your Swiss banking partner, correct? Actually, it's routed through our Channel Islands subsidiary for tax optimization. Graham's smile remained fixed, but his words came slightly faster now. All completely legitimate, I can assure you. I'm sure. Malcolm leaned back, his casual posture at odds with the sharpness in his eyes. It's just that my CFO mentioned something about discrepancies in the Basel compliance documentation. Probably just a clerical issue. From her position in the corridor, Amy watched Graham's composure begin to fracture like ice under pressure. His hand moved toward his phone. Near the bar, a man Amy hadn't consciously registered before, younger, nondescript, wearing a server's vest that somehow didn't quite fit right, began edging toward the main exit with calculated nonchalance. Amy's instincts fired. She caught Leo's eye, the kitchen manager, who'd shown her kindness during her first chaotic shifts, and made a subtle gesture toward the departing figure. Leo, bless him, read her signal instantly and moved to intercept, pushing a loaded bus tub through the doorway with impeccable timing, creating a human roadblock while apologizing profusely about the tight quarters. Back at the table, Malcolm delivered the final blow with devastating calm. Graham, let's try this another way. Call your Basel contact right now and provide me with a real-time verification code for account number. He glanced at the contract. CH 7734-9821. Should take 30 seconds if everything is as legitimate as you say. The polished mask shattered. Graham's hand froze halfway to his phone, his expression cycling through calculation, panic, and cold fury in rapid succession. Malcolm, I don't appreciate what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. Malcolm's voice dropped, losing all pretense of cordiality. I'm asking for a simple verification that any legitimate financial consultant could provide instantly. The silence that followed felt nuclear. Amy saw Graham's jaw tighten, saw him glance toward his associate now trapped by Leo's apologetic obstruction, saw the moment he recognized checkmate. Two men in dark suits materialized from the private dining room adjacent to Malcolm's table. Security that had apparently been present all along, waiting. Mr. Sinclair. Malcolm stood, his full height and authority suddenly visible. Or whatever your real name is, I think we're done here. Gentlemen. The security team moved with professional efficiency, not quite touching Graham, but creating a physical presence that allowed no argument. Graham's sophisticated veneer evaporated entirely, replaced by something sharp and desperate. You're making a serious mistake, Vance. Do you have any idea who you're? I know exactly what I'm doing. Malcolm's voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who just dodged a bullet. I'm not signing fraudulent documents, and I'm giving you exactly 30 seconds to leave before I call the actual authorities. Amy pressed herself against the corridor wall, watching Graham being escorted toward the exit, his expensive shoes clicking against marble with the finality of defeat. The man posing as a server followed moments later, Leo finally allowing passage once Malcolm gave a subtle nod. The entire restaurant had fallen silent, wealthy patrons frozen in their seats, witnessing something they'd later describe to friends in hushed, thrilled tones. Malcolm remained standing at his table, his hand steady as he gathered the fraudulent documents, his expression unreadable. Then he turned toward the corridor where Amy stood and walked toward her with measured steps. When he reached her, his face had gone pale beneath his composed exterior, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally showing. "You just saved $500 million. His voice was quiet, almost wondering. "And probably my company." Relief crashed over Amy like a physical wave, followed immediately by the cold dread of reality. She'd intervened in a guest's private business. She'd caused a scene. She'd made claims that, even if true, violated every boundary between server and patron. The restaurant's management would be Ms. Walker. The voice cut through her momentary relief like a knife. Christine Beaumont, Vellum and Vine's general manager, strode toward them with fury radiating from every line of her designer suit. "My office." "Now." "Christine, wait," Malcolm began. "Mr. Vance, I apologize profusely for this completely inappropriate. She just prevented me from being defrauded." Malcolm's tone carried steel now. "I suggest you." "With all respect, sir, staff conduct is not your concern." Christine's smile was ice wrapped in velvet. "Ms. Walker, you're suspended pending investigation into your conduct tonight. Please collect your things and leave immediately." Amy felt the familiar weight of consequence settling over her shoulders, the same crushing pressure she'd experienced when her whistleblowing had destroyed her previous career, when telling the truth had made her professionally toxic. But underneath the fear and exhaustion, something else stirred, something that felt almost like freedom. Malcolm started to protest again, but Amy touched his arm gently. "It's all right, sir. Thank you for listening to me." She looked at Christine, meeting her manager's furious gaze with unexpected calm. "I understand." The walk through the restaurant felt endless, staff members averting their eyes as she passed, diners whispering behind raised menus. Tanya, the veteran server who'd warned her just days ago to keep her head down and avoid drama, pressed a hand to her shoulder in silent support as Amy retrieved her coat from the employee area. The October rain had begun falling while the drama unfolded inside, cold and cleansing against Amy's face as she stepped onto the sidewalk outside Vellum and Vine's gilded entrance. Her phone, her keys, her dignity, all intact. Her job, her income, her careful plans for stability, all destroyed. Again. But as Amy stood in the rain, watching expensive cars glide past and the city lights blur through the water streaming down her face, she realized something fundamental had shifted. The last time she'd lost everything for telling the truth, she'd felt broken, betrayed, like the world had punished her for doing what was right. Tonight felt different. For the first time in years, she felt clean, terrified, unemployed, but clean.